Hello and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Darren Maloney, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees. It's great to see everyone today. Today, CMC will explore the significant impact weather has on our lives and businesses. Weather is one of the things we all hold in common. We curse it when it's bad, we marvel at its extremes, and we know it affects us for better or for worse every day. Let's welcome the top meteorologists from each of our commercial TV stations as they provide a behind-the-scenes look at the science, the technology, and the art of forecasting. Please welcome, from WCMH NBC4, Dave Mazza. From WBNS 10 TV, Mike Davis. And from WSYX ABC6 and WTTE Fox 28, Marshall McPeak. And our host for the discussion, Carol Looper. Carol, the podium's yours.
Thanks, Darren. I think all three of you can talk, so I'm not going to do any intro other than to say that I'm going to ask a question of all three of you and jump in. And first question, how do you find businesses and what businesses do you find affected by your forecasts? Who calls you to find out what's it going to be?
Who doesn't? Yeah. No, I mean, I think schools obviously come to mind, and the different districts are really interesting because there are some, that they'll want me to handicap the odds on what are the odds we'll have school tomorrow. And it really depends on how long your bus route is, what kind of condition you're dealing with and stuff like that. But, concrete layers, I used to get contractor calls all the time, airports, travelers, all that kind of stuff. So just about everybody is touched by it one way or another.
Yeah, landscapers, we end up getting, my favorite calls a lot of times, and you guys probably get the same ones, is you get the call that'll say, hey, we're thinking that school might be canceled tomorrow. The guys over at 6 or 10 said this and that. What do you think? And then they try to play us against each other. And the thing is, it's not our job to figure that out, but a lot of these places do make decisions based on what we tell them. So as far as landscapers, I talk about that because a lot of them also do they're doing the snow plowing, and they've got the 2-inch rule, so they call us constantly. And if we say 1 to 3 inches, they're on the phone like every hour or messaging us. And social media really makes that happen a lot more now, too.
I used to have a guy who was he did streets and tar. So he needed to know, is it going to be dry? And he would call every single day at the same time and want to know. And eventually I said, people pay a lot of money for this. And so he called for like one more day, and that was about the end of that. But every time we forecast rain, we'll hear from the car wash people. Every time we forecast rain, we hear from the folks at the golf courses that say, you're just driving people away. I'm like, well, I'm just trying to get
That's so we can go play, though, that's why.
Yeah, exactly. We want the course to ourselves.
On Fifth Avenue over there, that car wash, there's always I see their sign every once in a while that says, and they're always wrong. So, I mean, but what you said, Dave, about, people they shop the weather. It's like, I've talked to 6, I've talked to 4,
Like it's an opinion.
Do you have a better offer for me? And all I've got is what I think it's going to do, not, and what do? Pick the one you like the best? It doesn't work out that way.
Well, but there are also limitations on that. When you call me today and you say, I'm getting married in October, what's it going to be like on the 12th? I'll be like, cooler. I mean, we're really good for the first few days, and then out to 7 days, it's still pretty good, but 6 months out, okay.
See your almanac.
See the almanac.
Do you compete with each other for accuracy? Can you keep stats of how accurate you are?
To be honest, I don't know that it's a competition so much as we compete with ourselves.
That's the way I'd put it, yeah.
Because it's not so much did they get it or did we get it, it's did I get it and did we give our viewers the right forecast. And let's be honest, you all know, I mean, there are more days than not, it's spot on. But there are every once in a while where, okay, it was a little smidge off. But
that's where you don't answer the phone.
That's where you don't answer the phone. But it's not like we're going out of our way to try to ruin your day.
Yeah.
We're trying to give you the best forecast we can.
Well, we don't keep, personally, we don't look at what the other guys are doing because our job is to make sure that we are trying to get the best forecast out for everybody that's out there. Now, there are services out there that keep track of this kind of stuff. You guys have probably heard us talk about the most accurate forecast that we've had, and we've had it for several years in a row. So there are companies that go through and they track it, but it's difficult because you think on a day-to-day basis, if you're going on points, you could be talking about whether it rains at 11:59 or 12 o'clock in the morning. That's the difference of it raining on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So it's not a perfect mathematical formula that they can do for that. And I've done forecasting games even in college before, and it's a difficult thing to do. It's difficult to score that.
And it's interesting what's a right forecast and what's a wrong forecast. I mean, and numbers can be spun any which way you want. But there was a school project years ago. Kid called me, did a science fair project, or called the station and said, "Hey, you were accurate the most," and they checked, 4-6 in the dispatch. And so they sent me out there. And as is typical in the business, you get out there just before you go on. And we'll just call him Little Johnny. And Little Johnny's got a science fair project, and I mic up, and I'm ready to talk to him. And I said, "So, Johnny, so you did a project, and I was right the most, huh?" And he said, "Yeah, and you were only right once." And I went, after turning 3 shades of red, the issue was if I said it was going to be 49 in the morning and 62 in the afternoon, and it was 48 in the morning and 63 in the afternoon, wrong. So the question is, what's right, what's wrong? And unfortunately, it's a weird town. As many suburbs as we have, it's not the same in Bexley, Gahanna, Whitehall, Upper Arlington, Dublin. And there's only one official reading in the city, and that's at the airport. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you live at the airport?
No one?
Well, sometimes you feel like you do, but yeah. So again, it's one of those things that we were talking at the table about hail. On days when you have hail, and people come to you months later, and they'll ask you, was there hail on Tuesday the 5th? And the first thing you do normally is go to the climate record and look. But that only tells you if there's hail at the airport. You can go to the dispatch, or you can do like Marcia was saying. I just tell people, write this day down, so you know that you had hail on this given day. And there are services out there that tell you that, but it's all about the airport. Nobody lives there.
One of the things that, and to Mike's point, is we cover 23 counties.
Yeah.
So we're looking at from Bucyrus to Portsmouth and Marysville to Cambridge. And the weather between Columbus and Cambridge, or this season in particular, Bucyrus even to Columbus, can be a completely different forecast. And so we're mostly focused on the Columbus area because that's where the biggest portion of the population is. But that forecast is still just as valuable to the folks in Cambridge and in Guernsey and Noble counties as it is to the folks in Union County. So we do our best to try to spread the love as much as we can.
And exactly. And if you don't say Findlay for 3 days, someone will call and tell you, you haven't mentioned us in forever. So you got to get everybody in.
And you think about even a pattern that we have right now going on where we have this front kind of sitting around. Some people may have sunshine, and we're on the air talking about, it's been raining, or we had hail up in this spot, and it's sunny in the south. I mean, was it a couple of weeks ago, we had temperatures about 25 degrees difference across our area for a day. And when we go on the air and we say, hey, it's going to be, 45 today and it's 70 in Athens, people are wondering what we're looking at. So that does become difficult at times for folks to kind of, listen to us when we say one number in Columbus. So we have to, that's why I think it's really important that we show these maps that show the numbers across the area, especially in those days where we have massive amount of difference from south to north or east to west.
You mentioned the word patterns. They talk about hurricane season, tornado season, but there are also those events outside of those seasons. Talk about the patterns, the weather patterns that you follow.
Well, there's a number of different tracks. I mean, typically in the winter, our pattern comes out of the northwest. I mean, the air flows across the Great Lakes, which is one of the reasons we're not the sun capital of the world in the winter. So, day after day after day. In fact, somebody, Jerry Revish, my co-anchor, said to me, he said, we had the final report of the month of February. There were 2 clear days in February. Then the first weekend of March, we had 2 clear days. And I said, Jerry, we're ahead of things already, and we got more days this month. So we have had a few more clear months. So it really depends on, the time of year. It comes out of the southwest. Most people, they ask you where your thunderstorms come from or where the moisture come from. I'll ask kids in school, and they'll say Lake Erie, or they'll say whatever. And most of it comes all the way up from the Gulf. I mean, you get a strong southerly flow of air from the jet stream and things down south. And so we get a lot of our moisture direct from the Gulf. But unless you're familiar with the patterns, and I think having moved around a little bit back in the day, and everyone having moved. I think it takes probably a good 2 years to get used to local patterns before you can really forecast the weather. Because you go to school, but you don't know about these little things we call microclimates. The why, the Bell Fountain Ridge, things happen there that don't happen here, or the urban heat island, or, this river valley, those kind of things. So all of that you have to learn along the way, and you get better, I think, as you go.
Well, and one of the other things that you look at, you hear people talk about the El Nino pattern, the La Nina patterns, and that's something that we look for seasonal. And I think you guys probably get the same questions. Usually about August 15th or so, we really start getting questions from folks asking us, hey, what's it going to look like this winter? Are we going to get a lot of snow? And the first day that it's 95 or whatever, they're like, oh, so this means we're going to have a cold winter, or it's going to snow, or it's going to be this or that. And we look at these long-term patterns, like we had a weak La Nina pattern heading into the summer or into this winter, and now we're starting to exit back into a neutral pattern. These kind of drive the long-range weather patterns, but it's not the day-to-day stuff. So you could still get a snowstorm in a weak La Nina or a strong El Nino winter pattern. You could still get these things. And the other thing is, like, when we talk about these winter patterns and we look at the forecast, we'll say, oh, it's going to be a drier than normal, a less snowfall than normal winter. However, if it's going to be warmer, one of the things that's difficult to explain, and I've gone to lots of different places and tried to explain this, but when it's warmer, if that lake is open, Michigan or Erie to the north of us, and we get a northerly flow, we're going to get a lot more snow right around those lakes. So that kind of skews that data as well. So there's never just like a perfect, this is, it's weak La Nina, it's going to be warm and wet everywhere. It could be different, and those patterns could really kind of dictate that.
People forget we can get lake effect here.
Yes.
Ours usually comes all the way from Lake Michigan when it happens, but we can actually get that here. And one of the things that I think we don't talk about on the air a lot, but is an enormous factor, is just the position of the jet stream. And it changes literally day by day, but it can be a huge determining factor in, are the showers that are coming through tomorrow going to turn severe? Or are they just going to be a little bit of rain and we're done? And a lot of that has to do with what's going on way up above us and whether it's pulling that air up. It gets into a whole lot of the science that the consultants say, yeah, don't do that.
We find it interesting.
We find it interesting, but we're the nerds about it.
And you have 2.5 to 3 minutes to say it all.
Right, right. So
You do predict extended forecasts. You particularly talk about the weekend starting on Monday, because everybody wants to know,
Everyone wants to know
Right.
what the weekend weather forecast is going to be. How do you do that? How do you know on Monday what it's going to be on Saturday and Sunday?
I just wake up and I know.
right.
I know, I know. That's you, but you've been doing this for probably longer than anybody.
No, my wife years ago, she told me, like, I'd go on vacation, I'd be gone, and someone would stop you on the street and ask you about the weather for the weekend or for whatever. And she said, I used to be, grumpy, and I would say, I don't know, I've been gone. And she says, you can never say that. So really, you find yourself kind of paying attention almost every day. I think it's rare that you get a surprise, but I will admit there's been a Saturday or two where you wake up, especially in the winter, where something throws you a curveball, and the first word that comes out of my mouth is not, good morning, sunshine. So, you do focus on it because that's what people focus on.
And really, it's our life. I mean, if I wasn't on television doing this, I would still be a complete nerd about weather. Like, I absolutely love it on my days off. I was out in Texas last week. I still wanted to go out and check out the weather patterns, what was going on. So it's kind of, you wake up and every single day you're looking at the same, if you look at the same image, or if you looked at a picture every single day and you just look for subtle changes of what's going to change in that 8th or the 9th or the 10th day, and then you keep watching that pattern as it evolves over time. And obviously with weather, as everybody in here knows, because there may have been a time where we've missed a forecast by a degree or more than that things do change. And a small little change this afternoon, like if I said it was going to be 58 today and it was 57, or if the rain came in a little bit later, that could have an impact on what happens tonight, tomorrow, and 7 days out as well. And even the amount of rain, if we see, if I thought we were going to get an inch of rain today and we see half an inch of rain, that soil moisture is going to be gone faster if we get more sunshine, and that could change the temperature forecast for the weekend. So it's kind of something where you're watching it and it's always evolving, but it's always in the back of your mind too. I could tell you exactly what numbers I said last night on the air, which I'll forget in 3 hours when I put together a new forecast.
And we will tell you, we do qualify things on occasion, but it's like, sometimes the difference between a good day and a bad day can be like very, very small little something goes wrong. And
Even
it
on
magnifies.
vacation, never leave the house without knowing the forecast, because someone's going to ask. But let me share an analogy, and I think this is amazing, and I give full credit to Andrew Buckmichael for this one. Think of the forecast as a bowling alley. Day one, you're at half a length of the bowling alley. You got a real good chance of hitting a dead-on strike from half a length. Day two is a full length of that bowling alley. There's a little more wiggle room going on there. You can still dead-on strike and you're good. Day three, day four, day five, and by the time you get to about day six, you're in the parking lot.
Are there bumpers?
Well, sort of. But by the time you're that far out, there's a whole lot that can go wrong between here and there. And part of what we try to explain to the folks who complain about the forecast is this is why we update it every single day, sometimes 3 and 4 times a day. As new information comes in, we're going to adjust based on what that is. Because like Dave said, something small now becomes exponentially different later down the road.
When I talk to kids at school, it's interesting. One of the analogies I like to use with them is, so there's like a big storm in the Pacific Northwest, big snowstorm, and I know what it's doing, I know which way it's moving, I know how fast it's going, so why can't I go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday it's going to slam Columbus and we're going to get hit with heavy snow? And then I'll ask them, I say, what might go wrong with that scenario? And there are so many things meteorologically and geographically, and I mean, there's mountains, there's pressure systems, there's wind, there's moisture, there's temperature, there's so many things that can go wrong. Yeah, and there's a lot of, as I say, like with my putting, there's a lot of green in between. So you hope to get there.
You may not want to answer this, but have any of you blown it big time?
No.
Okay, that's my...
I'll be honest. I think one of the most difficult things is kind of like on a day like today. When I worked in Texas for a long time, and one of the things, fog, I think, has got to be one of the most difficult things, because if it's a day where you have fog in the morning, and especially in the summertime, and it's forecast to lift at some point during the mid-morning into the afternoon, and it doesn't, or it doesn't somewhere, right, but everywhere else it does. It may not here in Columbus, and we're saying it's going to be 85, 86, and the fog takes a little bit longer to get out here, but everywhere outside of the metro, it's sunny. Everyone else is in the mid to upper 80s, and we're still in the 60s or 70s here. So that's one of those things that I think is one of the most difficult things that can bust a forecast, if there's something that can. Because most of the rest of the stuff is just timing issues, you know. And like you were saying, you know, if you have a system off the West Coast, there's also 3,000 miles. I mean, imagine if you're driving from, you know, San Francisco to Columbus, and, you know, you could put in Google Maps, it's going to take 29 hours straight to drive there, but you're not anticipating a truck accident or getting pulled over or just anything like that may happen along the way that'll slow down your trip. So that's kind of, weather works the exact same way. I talk about when we do school talks, I talk with kids and I explain things like you were talking about, Marshall, about jet streams. You know, most people think of the weather one-dimensional or two-dimensionally, like it just goes, east, west, north, south, but you don't think about it above you. And I tell the kids always, it's like a sandwich. There's different layers. There's bread, there's meat, there's lettuce, there's tomatoes, and you may have if you have 2 pieces of bread and you just have some cheese in the middle, it's a cheese sandwich. But if you throw in some turkey or you throw in tomatoes, you have a different type of sandwich, and the atmosphere works the same way. If you put different ingredients in there, you may have freezing rain, you may have snow, you may have rain. So there's a lot of different things that changes constantly, and that could change the forecast just a little bit.
And then there's a leaf blower under the sandwich that's trying to blow it off your plate. So there's all these things that can happen. Yes, we've all been wrong at times, Carol.
There was one.
Good answer. Good answer.
I'll be honest. There was one day, and Mr. Gelber may remember this. This happened in a morning meeting. We had blown it. We blew it. Just wrong all over the board. We were wrong. 6 was wrong. 4 was wrong. 10 was wrong. The weather service was wrong. Everybody blew it. So there was some consolation for us that, okay.
We go down together.
We went down together. Everybody blew it. And the news department was giving us so much grief. And I finally said, okay, when y'all learn to get the past right, then you come talk to me about the future. At which point I thought the news director's head was about to explode. I'm like, gotta go. But there's a whole lot to things change, and try as we may, and we have amazing technology, plus the computer models that all really help drive what these forecasts say. But and this week is a perfect example. We get to about 96 hours on the models, one goes that way, one goes that way, and it becomes a completely different forecast. You've probably seen the spaghetti plots, is what we like to call them, for the hurricane forecasts. And you see all these lines going in different directions, and every last one of those is a different model with a different interpretation of what it thinks is going to happen. Our job then is to try to interpret which one of these or several of them seem to be the most likely scenario based on what we know are the model's biases. The same thing happens when we're trying to figure out whether it's going to snow this weekend. If one model is going one way and another one is going another, we understand there's one model that over-deepens a low, especially in the summer. There's another one that, so once you know some of those biases, you begin to take some of them with a grain of salt.
But the difficulty too is some of the models, like even for this weekend that you're talking about, some of them have, it being 65, and then the next run of the exact same model has it 48 and
Right.
snowing in the morning.
That happened last night, by the way.
Yeah.
That situation showed up last night.
And that's why I think also, a lot of times when you look at all this data that we have coming in all the time, you can't jump at one thing. You've got to stay consistent with what you have been watching on this. And that comes back to the pattern thing a little bit as well, and also the local knowledge too. You know what the weather is like in a certain area. You've seen the same scenarios setting up time and time again. And you can't just jump at some crazy thing because there are a consistent set of models that like to just bounce all over the place. And that's where we get into that part where people go, well, my iPhone said it was going to be snowing tonight, and now it's saying it's going to be 65 tomorrow. And that's based off of one of those models.
Just one.
But I think we try to, in fact, we use a model that we show quite frequently on TV. Every once in a while you disagree with it. So the discussion in your head is, do I go with it? Right. And so I asked a consultant one time, about that, and they're like, yeah, of course you use it, and then you say why you disagree with it, which sets you up as the expert. So, but like I'll run the same model, and I'll show it updates constantly throughout the course of the day, and I'll run the one at 5 and 6, and then by 11, I'll notice that, that snows at a different time, or everything's different, and that's the same model. Yeah. So again, they're constantly ingesting information and spitting it out, and the reason sometimes we all sink or swim together is because most of the models are actually big government-run, supercomputers that put these things together, and we all have access to all of those. Now, we all have some proprietary stuff, and we all have our own experiences too, but we all basically have the same model data to work with. So there's only so much information out there, and when people ask me about forecasting and will it ever get better, and will we be able to say rain in 5, 4, probably not, because the system is so complicated. But the way you explain it, forecasting is based on a grid where there's information points coming in. And so there's a grid like this, and there's spaces between the grid points where nobody knows what's going on there. So models take a leap and say, I'll interpret what's going on in this space to that space. The only way forecasting could ever get significantly better is if you tighten that grid and put information, data points everywhere. The expense of that, and I can only imagine, and because that's mainly a governmental function, let's vote on whether we want more accurate forecasts or whether we can live with, because the cost would be astronomical, I think.
Yeah. But that's also one of the reasons why when you're just looking at your phone, that's using one model, and in general, so you're looking at maybe, here's my phone says this is what it's going to do in Clintonville, as opposed to Grove City, as opposed to Marysville. But that's still just one model. Where the human factor comes in is we're using the knowledge that we have to interpret some of what's right and what we think is wrong in those models. And that human element is what I think is making the forecast better than just getting the straight up computer answer.
I agree.
If you just compare, because I love numbers, I'm honest to God, I'm a nerd. And I will go back, I have every forecast I've ever made since I've worked, I'd say probably in the last 10 or 15 years, I've gotten a folder somewhere. And I'll go back sometimes and look at, where I missed forecasts, what I did right, what I did wrong. And you look at the numbers versus the models, and it's incredible how much better that your forecasts are consistently compared to any of the models. And it's fun to kind of look back at how bad they were, run to run or day to day. There might be a day where they show something that's completely wrong. So it's fascinating showing how much better our forecast and putting everything together and using your knowledge is than these supercomputers that should, in theory, be a lot smarter than we are, but they're not, because they can't use that human element that still is needed to fill in those blanks, I think.
Yeah.
You're talking about models. In the past several months, I have heard forecasters talk about the European model. What is that?
Well, the European model is actually one I think it's been better this winter than most of our
It has.
local models. So it's really, there's a series of them to look at. And like they all have said, there's biases in this one, there's biases in that one. Some are good with temperatures, some are good with rainfall, some are good with snow amounts. And it's just one of the ones that actually has kind of just stepped to the forefront more. And I think it used to be back in the day, I don't even know we talked about models back in the day. And I think it's becoming more, just like you talk about radar, you talk about Doppler, and you talk about things that weren't really in the public consciousness. And then words like derecho and some of these other things that have happened, that's like, what's the bound one?
Polar vortex.
The polar vortex, thanks, it's been outlawed. So there are things like that, but they become the term of the day or the whatever. And so the European model just has had a pretty good run, so that's why we've cited it.
Some of the American modeling, though, should get better with these new satellites that we have up. I think having direct access to a lot of that data, they've sent up to the second one, the West Coast one, should be active, in, I think, the fall. And so the better data, the images that come out of these things are incredible now. They have better ideas of where fog is compared to cloud cover. You got to remember these things are 22,000 miles away. So they're far away, but the data they're getting is getting better, a lot better, and that should help to make some of these, we've got high resolution models now that go out 18 hours, and they're pretty good. They're updated every, some of the experimental stuff's updated every 15 minutes, and this data is getting better and better. It's not perfect, but it's getting better.
I think part of it too, and the reason that you hear us talking about it more these days, is just straight up transparency.
Yeah.
That this is, we're more able now, especially through social media, to have a discussion with you about here's why we're putting the forecast together the way we are. We get 2.5 minutes on TV to do it. So you're going to get what we think is going to happen, not the why we think it's going to happen. So with that in mind, through social media and we've got a few other outlets, but you can spend more time to talk about this is my thinking. Which also means you can go back and look at it again later and go, oh yeah. that was either spot on or should have leaned more toward the other model. So it's an ongoing process, but I think it's partly about transparency.
Talk about global warming and climate change. I'm not asking for political opinions. I'm asking for meteorological opinions.
Oh, good luck with that.
I think one of the things I think is very difficult about that is, to that point, the political side of it. I don't get paid by any political party to feel one way or the other, so I feel like my opinion is based off of science, but that is a very difficult thing to try to talk to somebody that politically feels one way or the other on. And it doesn't matter what you present them with, they will find some story they saw on Facebook or some post that their uncle put up 3 years ago that disproves whatever you're trying to explain to them. And, one of the things, though, it's funny, I'll hear people that will say, I don't believe this, it was warmer back in 1986 or whatever. And they'll say, but what's weird? The leaves are green a lot longer in the fall than they used to. Or I don't remember it being 75 in February, like as much as it is now, but I don't believe what you're telling me either. Or we get and I know for a fact you guys get these phone calls. The first time that it's 20 below zero,
Oh yeah.
how about that global warming now?
Your global warming now.
So, but then you get people on the other side that will call you when it's 78 in February and say, see, you guys should be talking about this more. This just proves it. And weather and climate are two different things, too. One-day events are not climate. That's the weather. And I think that's a distinction that people need to understand a little bit better. But the politics of it make it very difficult. And I know, like, even when you go to some of these weather conferences, there are people that are very heated. And sometimes if you hear somebody that we get those magazines or the calendars from certain places that try, or the literature that try to disprove it as if we're not, already intelligent on this, this information.
There's an organization in DC that sends us information all the time, and that is their mission, is to contradict and to disprove the idea of the planet warming. And a lot of this, I think, comes down to an economic argument. Because, let's be honest, if we find a cause, we know, we can look at the numbers. The numbers are rising. That part is indisputable. But the cause is the big question for a lot of people. And once you find a cause, that inherently means you've laid blame. Once there's blame, that means somebody got to pay up. And so no one wants blame, even if it's an entire planet's worth of blame. So I think part of the political tinge to the whole thing becomes, I don't want to be responsible for this. And that leads us to the political arguments about it.
And that's been an issue for the U.S. because, frankly, the U.S. And some European communities have to step up and do a lot of the work that some of the bigger industrialized countries that don't have the regulations that we do aren't going to pay any attention to. So they just kind of go right. I mean, the pollution in some Chinese cities and different places around the world, India, some big manufacturing countries that just don't have the restrictions that we do here. So we do all these things to help, but we're all interconnected on a global scale. And unless you can get a global unit to act together, I don't know how you're ever going to make a difference in it. I don't think it's really, I mean, you can't lose by taking care of the environment and protecting it and all that. So regardless of where you fall on the issue, or whether we're just in a warming cycle or whatever, I think it's something that we wouldn't often talk about on TV, generally because it's so polarizing that you bring it up and then people just stop listening altogether.
There was a survey about that.
Yeah.
And they talked, it was some folks called Climate Central did a survey of TV meteorologists. You guys probably took the survey. And one of the things they wanted to know is, do you talk about these things on television? Are you educating?
In your 2.5 minutes.
Right,
Yeah.
because there's time. Are you educating your viewers about it? And in most cases, the answer was no. One, because of the time restrictions, but two, because it has become so political that you begin to turn people away by just talking about it.
And that's a total shame, but it's so true. But you think about, you talk about, Marshall was talking about the cost and what it would cost to put regulations or whatever. But think about it this way too. Imagine if we think 1-2 degrees is not that much. But imagine if all of a sudden, cotton that's farmed down in South Texas all of a sudden becomes a desert and they have to start farming cotton further north, and the corn crop that grows in Nebraska or Kansas or Iowa all of a sudden doesn't grow there anymore because it's too hot, and they have to either genetically modify this corn, which a lot of folks, my family included, my wife's very careful about what we're feeding our kids all the time. But if we're starting to change the makeup of what an ear of corn looks like so that it can survive heat, and we have to grow corn in Minnesota, and apples have to grow in southern Canada now, we're shifting the landscape of where our farmers in this country are also making their money from, and what's viable to actually grow in our country. And at that point, if we, the United States only goes so far north, and if we keep heating the southern parts of it, the northern parts are going to warm up, and all of a sudden we're not going to have land to be able to farm on anymore the same way that we used to.
And as Marshall said, they're always looking for blame in some way or another. And so one of the big questions as it relates to global warming is, will hurricanes be worse? Will storm damage be worse? And things like that. Well, it's another scenario where you're kind of comparing apples and oranges, because coastal development, the degree of these different things, people build where they have no business building. I remember when in Houston this past year when that huge rain came in, and there was nowhere, Houston was so covered over with concrete, they blocked all the natural drainage. So there's nowhere for runoff, there's nowhere for absorption. So we're causing some of these, so really whether global warming has an impact on it or not is almost irrelevant, in that we're not being very foresighted in terms of how we build. Like, I lived in Vegas before I came here, and Vegas averages 4 inches of rain a year, as opposed to about 40 we get here. So it needs somewhere to go when it rains, and there's mountains and there's drainage. So you'd see these big washes, these big, they look like big open canals with nothing in them. And you go, why is this here? And then when it rained, then you realized why that is here. But every once in a while, a builder would build a subdivision somewhere where, it shouldn't be, and then suddenly it wasn't again. So, building on cliffs, I know the ocean view is pretty, but if you live in coastal North Carolina, at some point you're probably going to get some hurricane damage.
Well, and there's also the evidence that we see happening in places like Miami, because now they're getting what they call sunny day flooding. So it's not that it's been raining 4 inches of rain today and we suddenly have the flooding. It's that the tide came in, and the tide is higher and higher than it's ever been. So now, on a beautiful sunny day, you have streets in Miami covered in water, and the city is literally spending billions of dollars on pumping stations to try to keep things dry. We're already seeing that happen. And whatever you want to blame it on, it's happening.
One more quick question, and then we'll take audience questions. You see the microphone over there? They are very eager to hear your questions. So please make your way to the microphone. One quick question. Radar. What role does it play in your predictions, and have the predictions gotten better over the years since you've been doing weather?
Oh, absolutely. It's like having an eyewitness in the field, which, we all have the things we're the radar station. We're the only live radar in central Ohio other than the one that's out, in Wilmington. So we keep an eye on that very closely. And it's great for, I find if you ever watch, it used to be Time Warner, but whoever the cable company is, the channel that's provided the radar loop, you can look at that thing and go, it is raining everywhere right now. And then you look out the window and you go, it's not raining. So sometimes it's so sensitive and they so overplay it that you don't know where it's actually raining. And radar is very good. It's like having more eyewitnesses in the field. And you really can't beat having eyewitnesses either. So people come into the equation too. But technology and the people both, you think you know what it's doing in a given place. Sometimes it's raining. There's a phenomenon called virga, where it's raining, but it's not hitting the ground because it's evaporating before it gets there. And the further away the radar is, the more it's looking up as opposed to down on the ground. And that's very true with snow, too. So we find it very beneficial, and I think it's as important as having eyes and ears in the field.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the nice things over the last, I forget how many years ago, when the radars went to dual pole, so we could basically, instead of just taking a slice flat of a radar, like when the radar goes out going through a raindrop flat, it goes through in a cross section now, so we could tell a little bit more about the intensity of rain, whether it's a snowflake or what we have as far as wind speeds a little bit better. And I think that has improved the forecast. I know the high-res models that we get also are using a lot of that data, and that makes them more accurate as well in the hour-to-hour forecasting. But a lot of this, radar is constantly, they're trying to improve the way it looks, and now syncing it up with the new satellites also to make it kind of fill in those gaps in spots that we may not have great radar coverage. Because honestly, in Ohio, the radars are kind of in horrible spots, in my opinion, where they're at. But that's a government decision.
Right. It's also good for what we call nowcasting. That if you need to know what's happening in the next hour, radar is awesome for that, especially when you put it in motion, you see where things are headed. But like Dave said, that also feeds into those models several times a day, which then also extrapolates into the future what's likely to happen.
CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Say your name, please, and ask your question. And please, no editorial comments. First.
Thank you. I'm Jane Scott, Columbus Metropolitan Club. I just have to ask this. Farmer's Almanac, woolly worms, 3 snows after Forsythia. It always rains. If it rains on Easter, it rains 7 Sundays after that. So do you guys have fun following that, or do you just try to ignore all that folklore?
Some of it is for real. Some of it, if you look at the actual science of it, some of it actually makes sense.
Oh, good. I'm so glad you're telling me this.
Not all of it, but some of it really does. And it's very localized because, let's be honest, 3 snows after the Forsythia may work in central Ohio, but that's not going to be the case in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So a lot of this, let's use the Forsythia. So, okay.
But you find someone that's got it in December.
That's witch hazel. Ha! So, nerd moment, did the research. But if you look at the heating degree days, there's some serious nerd stuff. But if you look at the heating degree days, for what it takes to bring a Forsythia to bloom, it usually ends up being right around late February, early March. Yeah. So based on the climate in Ohio, that's generally about when we get, 3 more snows. Yeah. So yes, some of those wives' tales do actually hold a little bit of water.
No, there's a lot of them that actually, they do make sense. They're all based on some kind of principle. Mm-hmm. The buzzards returning to Hinckley, robins showing up, cows in a huddle, expect a puddle. So, there's all that kind of stuff there is a scientific basis to it all just by observation. And I find that some of the best forecasters I've seen who aren't necessarily even meteorologists, but pilots, balloonists, outdoors people, they've gotten so used to they can look at the sky and say, oh, ring around the moon, rain or snow coming soon. And other people look out and say, I've never seen that before. And I'm like, how could you have missed that?
The mackerel sky.
Yeah, so many different things that give you clues.
The cricket thermometer works.
Yeah.
It works.
But it's really annoying when they get in the building.
You can't find them.
Can't find them.
Hi, I'm Cookie McIntyre, and our business is executive search. So we're always watching the weather when we send people around the country for their interviews, because it's very helpful if it's a beautiful day and the sun is shining that they're going to move to Minneapolis. But I have kind of what's a rudimentary question for you guys, and this may sound silly, but I've heard this both ways. When you guys say that there's 60% chance of rain, I've heard that it's 60% chance of rain over the whole area that's being covered, that it's 60% chance, or that 60% of the area you cover will have rain. So I was never really quite sure when you threw out those percentages, and thought maybe you can help us with that.
Who wants to field that one?
You know, I'll start off. We've gotten away from using percentages, I think, except for on one graphic that we use, and it's for that reason specifically. First off, what did you say? We have 23 counties that we cover from, you know, it's 140, 50, 80 miles, whatever it is, east to west, north to south. Is it 60%? I mean, to a regular person who's not a meteorologist, do you think of it as 60% of the day it's going to rain 100% of the time? Is it going to rain 60% of the area? So I personally prefer to use, you know, words that kind of explain, like, we may see a stray shower in the afternoon, and we try to day part out. I mean, we all do day part forecasting, and we try to stick more to you know, maybe some words like it's going to be likely to rain at a certain time, or we may have on and off rain showers versus using a percentage. It kind of goes both ways. I find the percentages for most people that I know don't understand them. But you'll see it on your phone and you'll look at it and say, oh, it's 100% or 90%, boy, that's going to rain. Or you see 10% and you're like, I'm going to still go do my thing for the day. So people kind of get it, but it's also, I think if you're just forecasting broad for an entire area, that is difficult. And that's one of the things I like to get away from using the percentages, because that does confuse people as to what exactly it does mean.
And on some of the apps, you know, it's like if there's a 20% chance for rain, which I would call slim to whatever, you know, it'll put up a rain symbol. So, you know, it's just interesting. It's not going to rain all day, but sometimes you find yourself trying to tell a whole day's worth of story. Like you said, rain coming in the afternoon, quiet in the morning, with one graphic. And how you get one symbol that can tell a whole day's story is kind of a difficult thing.
To add insult to injury, it's a debate in the meteorological community itself. Because for some folks, it is 60% chance at this particular point. So in our case, maybe Port Columbus. But for other folks, it's the 60% chance across the area. And so for those percentages to make a lot of sense, you kind of have to know where your forecaster is going. And that leads to confusion.
And they try to do that. They merge that with even more difficult forecasting, the long-range forecast. And there's like a 30% chance that it'll be somewhat above normal on a given, you know, it's like, wow, you've really lost me there. So.
And how many points do we have in our area, too? There's millions, essentially, of points.
So, for example, the other day, you might have
We're
said...
just stalling Ben, so you can't talk.
No, we're going to let Ben let's let Ben get his question in, because he may know stuff.
Yeah. First of all, my name is Ben Gelber. I'm new to the field. I specialize mostly in music videos. But I do want to ask a question. We often have to grapple with Graupel and other science topics. And how do you respond when we have a story like we had the other day that Arctic sea ice is now at an all-time or second lowest extent that we've ever seen, and meantime we're having all these nor'easters, and Europe has had this exceptional cold. So in this politically charged environment, as you guys alluded to, and I'm going to ask Dave specifically to invoke terms like latitudinal temperature gradient, and especially stratospheric sudden warmings in your answer.
Well, so here's the thing. I do know a professor that I could I tag you in for this?
Sure.
But you know, here's the thing. I think what is important to look at a lot of times, and I write stories on our web as well, and one of the things you don't look at, and Ben knows this, we talk about this stuff all the time, you can't look at just one area of the world. I mean, obviously, if we're really warm at one point, we're going to find out, or if Iceland's really warm, it's probably going to be pretty cold in parts of Europe at the same time. So you see, there's kind of the yin and the yang with the forecast. But as a whole, when you look at these forecasts, the seasonal numbers, that when they go back and the climate goes through NASA and NOAA, and they look at these numbers and they start saying, hey, we're at plus 1.5 degrees for the planet, which again, to most people doesn't seem like a big deal. what's the difference if it's 55 or 56.5 out? It's not a big deal. But as a planet as a whole, if all of the planet is that much warmer, that is a big deal. So that's kind of what we look at, Ben, going into that. But that is a good question, because you get one story that says that it snowed more in Antarctica, and people are immediately denying that the climate has changed whatsoever just because it has snowed more in one spot, or if sea ice has maybe gone down in one spot, but the ice on the continental shelf goes up a little bit. People try to find anything to kind of go towards their belief system, and will call you up and call you on it as well.
It's the same principle as some of the, the networks, where if you want this opinion, you watch that. If you want this opinion, you watch
Exactly.
that. So people look for things that support their own viewpoint in a lot of ways.
Ben, I'm going to invoke high amplitudinal zonal flow on that one.
That's an in
He's
joke.
grading you on this.
Right.
Hey, I do want to say how much affection I have for all three gentlemen. I've known Mike since the 1980s at a graphics conference in Minneapolis. Dave is absolutely a tremendous asset to our station. I work with Marshall for about 10 years, and you have three of some of the best, most knowledgeable, and most approachable meteorologists in the market. And since I work closely with all of you guys, I know how you respond to the general public, and how much I appreciate all that you guys do.
Ben, we appreciate you as well.
And Ben, I don't know how far it goes back, but I can do to Ben Gelber.
Remember that. Do the Ben Gelber.
My name's Amanda Sage, and I'm with the Metropolitan Club. My question is, you guys are definitely got the local flavor and the nerd thing going on, but you don't really strike me as the divas that have the snowmageddon type of mindset that's kind of come about in weather the last couple of years. How do you feel about this over-sensationalization of weather with, the snowmageddons and the naming the winter storms and just
I hate that.
all the drama?
Not a fan of the
Not a
naming.
fan of
So,
naming.
they're just not, locally they are, but, it's like, hey, we're going to have Storm Bob over the weekend. I don't like that. But, we try not to over-sensationalize whenever we can. It's just kind of interesting. But on the other hand, when you bring up snow, like we were talking, we've all talked about that, snow, yes or no, this weekend, right? And the amazing thing about just talking is we try to give a little perspective, we try to give some input, we try to talk about models all in our little bit of time, and then you have to judge whether you hear it. But sometimes if that word snow comes out of your mouth, like I had to put it out there the other night, I get groans even from my anchors, they groan at me. And I'm just like, I'm not saying it's going to be a big snow. But then there's the other phenomenon here where why is it that every snow is the first snow? We live...
Short memory.
We live in a place that gets 28 inches of snow a year on average. We've had a pretty average year this year. Last year we had 9. It goes up and down. But every snow, it's like, I've never driven in this. I've never seen anything like it before. So you have to make people aware, because you didn't warn me. Because again, they want someone to blame.
Yeah, but then the cool thing about that, though, and I'm so with you guys on the naming thing. I think it's ridiculous. But what's neat is people love talking about weather. Everybody thinks they're a meteorologist. So it is, I could be tracking something coming in at 1 in the morning, and there is somebody out there that I'll start doing a Facebook Live, and they'll get in there and they'll start asking me questions, going back and forth. Everybody is interested in it, which is kind of neat, and there's more availability to it. And that's where we kind of get time, especially off air, to kind of help educate people if they have a question about something. We've gone to school for this stuff, and we understand it. So it's kind of neat that so many people have a little bit more knowledge than maybe they used to have on this weather, and they're more into it now, because I'm into it, so I like it when other people are into it as well.
We also want you to know that it's coming.
Yes.
That's sort of the point. Whether we name it Bill, Ed, Todd, whatever it's going to be named, Zeus, or whatever they've come up with this season, but the important part is that you can prepare. So we don't want to over-sensationalize. We don't want to sensationalize at all, but we want you to be prepared. And I think that's the value in having a forecast at all, whether it's deciding whether you're going to take a trip, deciding whether you're going to close school in the morning. But it's about being ready, because when you're caught off guard, life is difficult. So our job is to try to get you prepared.
And then there's things that just baffle us that, like it'll snow in the morning or the forecast will have snow in it. The snow will come to an end. And then you hear, it'll be over for a couple hours. And then you hear that the school is sending people home early. And you scratch your head and you go, why on earth are they doing that? But then there are little things, in the districts in terms of buses and sharing with this district or that district that you may not know about. But sometimes I'm just like, were you listening? Because it's like, what's going on here?
Time for one more quick question, please.
Hi, my name is Erwin Bain. The Cincinnati Reds home opener today was postponed till Friday because of inclement weather. And my question is, did the Reds call any of you to get your advice as to when the game would be played?
No, but we did the Reds forecast, so.
We get a lot of people asking about that the last couple of days, though, especially baseball season. People ask about that, or Buckeyes games. Sporting events are really the thing that people want to know, because you're going to be sitting outside on a metal bench and you want to know, or a metal seat, you want to know if it's going to be raining, cold, whatever it is. And so those are the big things. We had a lot of questions about that, though.
And I hope it's not a bad sign for the Reds, because their last spring training game kind of went by the wayside too. So Buckeye games are probably the most, because people are just fanatic about that.
They're still going either way.
They're going to go either way, but they're going to be mad at you. So the weather, I find that weather is the one aspect of the news that people take personally.
Mm-hmm.
I said, the Reds lose, you don't get mad, or the Buckeyes lose, you don't get mad at the sportscaster, you get mad at the coach, you get mad at a player. There's bad news, something happens, you don't get mad at the anchor. But I tell you what, my popularity goes so up and down on a daily basis based on whether it's nice. Hey, good job today. And all I can do is go, thanks.
And that's inside your building, too.
Yeah, exactly. So.
The Buckeye games are the big ones, but the way I approach the whole thing, and I think you guys probably do too, is, again, I want you to be prepared. I would rather tell you to show up at a Buckeye game with this chance of rain and have the rain gear with you and not need it, than for you to tell me that you were surprised when suddenly it opened up in the shoe. So I want you to know that this is a possibility and to be prepared when you get there.
And they're much more forgiving of that if you said rain and it doesn't, as opposed to if you didn't and it does.
They only remember when you blew it, for them. All that 95% of the time that you were spot on, they never remember that part.
That's so true.
Well, thank you very much, guys. We appreciate your time today. Wildly entertaining.
Thank you.
Three great TV stations and three great weather anchormen up here. So thank you very much, guys. I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation with coffees and cookies in the back. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, and on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please help us thank again our speakers, Dave Mazza, Mike Davis, Marshall McPeak, and Carol Looper, and thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you next week.